when the world is in crisis
การแก้ไขปัญหาโควิดถือเป็นวาระแห่งชาติ
and people are looking for hope and answers. Thai PBS World is there with you with the best minds of the day. Join us on Thai PBS World tonight, every weekdays at 7 p.m. Thai PBS World, we bring Thailand to the world.
สวัสดีค่ะ Very good evening and welcome to Thai PBS World Tonight, our 7 o'clock news. I am Natha Gomonwadin.
And good evening, I'm Tep Chayong. And today is the first day of the fourth phase of the easing of the lockdown. And Gunatha, we certainly can say that things are now back to normal or near normal, judging from the traffic and all these business activities that we see today in Bangkok and other cities. And for 3 consecutive weeks now that we don't have a single locally transmitted infection in Thailand.
Yes, so that's good news because all the new cases are people who returned to Thailand and they were in state quarantine. So it means no local infection totally in the past 3 weeks. And today, no new case and no new death for Thailand. But always that we still have to remain vigilant that according to spokesperson of CCSA, Dr. Tawisin Vissanuyothin, especially other countries perhaps are facing second wave of the coronavirus pandemic, especially China.
That's right, yeah. And you know what happened today? As soon as the curfew was lifted, last night, the moment the curfew was lifted, a sudden return of motorbike racing on the streets of Bangkok and other provinces. And this made the Prime Minister very angry today during his interview with the media. Prime Minister Prayut said he had received reports that motorcyclists returned to the city streets for racing last night. And he urged parents to keep a close watch on their children who might be flouting rules and regulations and will face legal action as a result. And he then went on to threaten to reimpose curfew if things start to get out of hand. I don't want to see us go back to square one, said the Prime Minister, who called on all members of the public to cooperate to ensure that there will not be another round of pandemic.
And he encouraged police officers to have checkpoint on this motorcycle racing instead of common passerby.
Now, in fact, during the lockdown, of course, all streets in Bangkok and other major provinces all quiet, right? Otherwise, on weekends there would be racing by young motorcyclists in many places.
Yeah.
And then, Kunatha, Prime Minister Prayut today also made a very interesting comment on what he sees as an escalation of activities detrimental to the monarchy. The Prime Minister mentioned no specific incidents, but directed his concern at university students who he said are increasingly involved in anti-establishment movements. It's understood that he was responding to criticisms of the government following the disappearance of political dissident Wanchalerm Saksit, who was abducted in broad daylight in the Cambodian capital Phnom Penh on June the 4th. Government critics said Wanchalerm, who fled the country after the military coup in 2014, was targeted because of his anti-establishment views, and his kidnapping has triggered an avalanche of anti-establishment comments on social media. And Prime Minister Prayut today denied the government had a hand in the incident. He said the incident happened in a foreign country. Who would have dared to do such a thing?
Yeah. So today probably is the first time that he come out quite strongly and quite clear on his voice and in relations to Least Majesty law as well. And on the separate occasion, Deputy Prime Minister Prawit Wongsuwan said security officials were investigating those involved. Once we get the list of names, we will prosecute them. He said, adding the Least Majesty law would not be used against them. So that is the very first time that Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister mentioned this law. Kun
That's
Thepchai.
right. Yeah. And the Prime Minister Kun Prayut today talked about what he claims to be a disinformation war going on. So he called on the public not to be misled by disinformation that he said is meant to sow hatred. And in a rare reference to Article 112 of the Criminal Code, General Prayut said the entire lèse majesty law has hardly been invoked in the past few years. He said His Majesty the King has made it known that he doesn't want to see anyone prosecuted under the article. His Majesty has shown his benevolence for the article not to be used against anyone, and yet you still keep violating it. What do you exactly want? This is a question from the Prime Minister today. And General Prayut said that the message from His Majesty the King on Article 112 was relayed to him directly. And he said he needs to speak out on this issue today in order to preserve peace and order of the country.
Yeah. It appears that the two strong men coming out and said this to the public for the first time since a number of people believed to be young began talking and chatting on social media a lot, or even used the hashtag to share damaging information about the palace about several months ago. And this issue seems heightened during Wanchalerm's reportedly abduction in Phnom Penh in Cambodia. So the issue has coming up again.
Yeah, and it has been almost 2 weeks now since Wanchalerm was abducted in broad daylight in the Cambodian capital of Phnom Penh. And the Cambodian government has been under increasing pressure to come up with information as to what happened to the young Thai political activists. And in the latest move, the Committee on Enforced Disappearances of the United Nations has submitted a formal request to the Cambodian government to take immediate and urgent action over Wanchalerm disappearance. The petition was submitted in compliance with the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons Against Enforced Disappearance, which Cambodia has ratified. The petition notes that the committee was informed that the perpetrators of Wanchalerm's disappearance appear to have been professionally trained, which would imply that they might be linked to state agents and that no ransom has been requested so far, according to the petition. And meanwhile, today, Kunatha, a small group of activists rallied in front of the Cambodian embassy in Bangkok for the second time today to demand justice for Wanchalerm. The demonstrators called on the Cambodian government to accelerate its investigation into Wanchalerm disappearance. Cambodian authorities had earlier insisted that they had no information about what happened to the Thai activists, but they said last week that they were launching a probe into the incident at the request of the Thai government.
Yeah. Officially, the Cambodian Foreign Ministry sent a letter replying to inquiries from Thai embassy in Phnom Penh saying that Mr. Wanchalerm has come and left Cambodia many times during 2014, 2015. And actually, they said he was granted a visa to stay in Cambodia only until 31st of December 2017. And he never renewed the visa. And the Cambodian government has no information about his disappearance. That's the reaction from Cambodian Foreign Minister regarding the inquiries about Wanchalerm.
It's quite obvious that critics of the government are trying to link Wanchalerm disappearance to the government in Bangkok. But of course, as Prime Minister Prayut today insisted, the government has no hand in what happened. So that's something that we need to wait until the investigation being launched by the Cambodian authorities come up with some progress.
Yes. And other rights groups has been advocating on the case of Kun Wanchalerm as well, Kun Thepchai, and trying to call for further investigation on his disappearance. For example, Asia Director for the International Federation of Human Rights said Cambodia was duty-bound to do so as one of the few countries in the region to have signed the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance. So it's along the same line as the messages from UN rights group as well. Why Human Rights Watch Deputy Asia Director Phil Robertson said both governments are also being urged to find Wanchalerm, and the investigation has finally started, but the Cambodian government must pursue a serious, impartial and transparent investigation that leaves no stone unturned in finding out what happened to Wanchalerm. So that's rights group coming out to advocate for the same cause.
Yeah. And now let's move to the domestic political front. If things go according to the originally plans, Thailand should have its first local elections in more than 6 years, toward the end of this year, if that's the plan, right? But the problem now is that the government may not have enough money left in its coffer to finance the long-awaited elections. Deputy Prime Minister Visanu Krungam admitted yesterday that the government has exhausted its financial resources in its fight against the coronavirus pandemic. And that means it might not have enough budget to hold the promised local elections. And of course, as expected, Dr. Visanu's remarks trigger a storm of angry reactions from the opposition camp and political activists. Sutin Klangsang, a leading MP of opposition Pheu Thai party, accused the government of using COVID-19 as an excuse to delay local elections. He said it only shows that the government is not sincere in its commitment to decentralizing state power.
Yeah, so that's the issue coming up after Deputy Prime Minister Visanu Krungam coming out to say that local election has to be delayed because they don't have enough fund to arrange local elections because they have spent the budget on COVID-19 relief.
Yeah, and the military suspended all local elections after taking power in 2014. And the Prayut government earlier suggested that the first round of local elections, including those for Bangkok, could be held by the end of the year. And Prime Minister Prayut today appeared exasperated when was asked about the issue. He refused to say whether the government is having budget problem, as suggested by his deputy, Dr. Visanu. He said, I will try to have some kind of election by the end of the year, but declined to be specific.
And an activist, Kunthepchai activist Sisu Wanchanya submitted a letter to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet on Monday, calling for them to order election commissions to organize local elections as soon as possible. In his opinion, Sisu Wanchanya said the government has to restore the economy after COVID-19 situation is resolved. Then local elections should be held as soon as possible, because it would help by injecting money into the economic system. And he said delaying local body elections, the government might be wanting to maintain control over local administrative power.
Now it's still a puzzle why Dr. Visanu Krungam, the Deputy Prime Minister, had to admit that the government doesn't have enough money in the coffer to finance local elections. Of course, he claims that all the money has been used to fight the COVID-19, but the rationale behind having the local elections delayed for this reason is quite puzzling.
Yeah. So it seems COVID-19 still a good reason.
No, the government critics don't believe so.
Yes, and another issue is about state of emergency as well. But with COVID-19, we still have to remain vigilant, especially on China. After 50 days of no new infection in Beijing. So suddenly, it's being feared that second wave of coronavirus pandemic may be rising in Beijing again. And Kunat Bunak has this story for us. So what's the latest situation in China, in Beijing especially?
Well, whoever is planning on a travel bubble with China may have to reconsider again because China has found new cases of COVID-19 only in Beijing. As of yesterday, they already found like up to 36 new cases, same as the day before, which is the city's highest daily infection count since late March. Like you said, over 50 days with no new infections at all. So the new cases have been traced to a famous wholesale food market, which is called Xinfadi, which is in Beijing. And so far, there are 79 cases that have been linked to this market. So not just in Beijing, but other cities. So people in other cities may have visited the food market and then they went back to their home city. So they might have found new cases of COVID-19 that are linked to this market. And local media reports say that the virus was discovered on chopping boards that are used for imported salmon at the market. And that is why major supermarkets in Beijing have removed this salmon from their shelves already.
Wow. But it's still unclear how the virus managed to land on the chopping board, right?
Exactly. It is suspected that the virus might have come from the chopping boards rather than the salmon itself. So many experts have been advising the people, or even in Thailand, we also been advised not to eat raw salmon. But on the other side of it, there are experts saying that it is impossible for seafood such as salmon to carry the virus, as seafood is usually shipped in refrigerated containers from overseas. But the possibility is that seafood can be contaminated by other means during the process of transportation or packaging.
But the question or the problem is raised in regarding to the market.
Exactly. It sounds like a deja vu here because if we all remember how the outbreak started back late last year in Wuhan, it came from a food market. But in Beijing, it's also a food market. So it's some sort of deja vu here. And people are scared that the food market is actually the main culprit of spreading such a virus.
So how has Beijing government tried to handle the situation? Lock down the whole city again?
Pretty much with the very strict measures as well as the restrictions, just like how the outbreak started last year. So what Beijing has done is that they've done widespread mass testing for those who've been to the market, as well as those with close contact with people working at the market, as well as places nearby. According to the Beijing Public Health Commission, Beijing has conducted more than 76,000 tests on Sunday, and 59 of them were tested positive. They also collected samples from people who were recently at the market, which was almost up to 9,000 people. However, around 6,000 of them were tested negative. Apart from the mass testing, the place where the market is located has launched a wartime-like control measures to curb the spread of COVID-19. The market, as well as other 11 residential communities around the market, has also been closed off.
So can we say that right now Beijing is facing second wave of the pandemic yet?
Maybe we can say that, but I think we should see what happens next. Maybe it might be a little bit too early to say if it's a real second wave here.
No, but it appears that China certainly has learned lessons from the Wuhan experience, and this time around they appear to be more forthcoming with information about the new outbreak.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure that China certainly doesn't want to be accused again of being too secretive about what is happening as far as the coronavirus is concerned. Yeah.
Interestingly, the market that is the epicenter of the new outbreak in Beijing here, the name is called Xinfadi, which is the biggest wholesale food market in Asia, not just China, but in Asia, and accounts for 80% of Beijing's entire farm produce supply. Thousands of tons of vegetables, fruits, and meats are traded right at this wholesale market every day. And speaking of the size of this wholesale market here, is almost 160 soccer pitches and more than 20 times larger than the seafood market in Wuhan, where the coronavirus originated last year. So that means if something goes wrong with that market, it will definitely disrupt the food supply chain in China.
Wow.
So speaking of Xifati wholesale food market, that's a big market, not just in China, but the whole continent.
Yeah, really huge market indeed. So if they're really facing second wave, so it means the whole situation is back to square one.
I would say so.
And that probably
and
will
nobody
affect
wants
us.
to see that happen. Certainly.
Sure.
Okay, thank you very much, Kun Nat.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's about COVID-19. In Beijing, probably they are facing second wave. We don't know. But another protest which is coming up and still going on is on Black Lives Matter in the US. And mostly this year they will have Gay Pride Parade. But this year the organizer of Gay Pride Parade has decided to not having the Gay Pride Parade, but decided to join with Black Lives Matter in Los Angeles. Take a look at this report.
Show me what America looks like. This is what America looks like. Show me what America looks like. This is what America looks like.
Thousands of demonstrators gather on Hollywood Boulevard in Los Angeles to protest police brutality. And this year, Gay Pride Parade was cancelled and replaced with a march for civil rights for all, including the Black Lives Matter movement. The last-stage protests come as lawmakers are debating how to reform a justice system seen by critics as stacked against poor and minority citizens, and which has proved resistant to change. The gay pride marches, which related to LGBTQ, have been held every year for many decades, whereas this year it was cancelled in Los Angeles. But it has been proceeded with the Black Lives Matter movement as a variation of the same theme, which is civil rights movement.
Yeah, we're living in the new civil rights movement. We're respecting civil rights movement and also LGBT history with Stonewall. So this is just an extenuation, it's a continuation of what our forefathers and foremothers have done for us.
Important thing right now. I know that it's also Pride Month and stuff, but I think as a gay man, I think it's important that we give back to the black trans people who paved the way for us. So.
You know what? This is my fifth, and I wish I could have participated in more. I'm just sick and tired of our black people dying in the streets for no reason.
The relations of those two movements have been taken together in LA this year to raise the concerns about the minority group and vulnerable groups in the society.
With big protests across the US and around the world, we cannot deny that President Donald Trump is being tested on his leadership as leader of the US. And when talking about crisis, leaders tend to be looked at as role model or as problem solver in solving crisis. And when we take a look at COVID-19 in Thailand in particular, how has Thai leaders manage the whole situation and maintain leadership during the crisis? Right now, we have an academic who has worked on leadership in Thailand by analyzing saving face, and what does that mean and what's his insight from COVID-19. Right now, we have Dr. Larry Persons, founder and CEO of CQ Leadership Consulting and author of the book, The Way Thais Lead. สวัสดีค่ะ Thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome to the program.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Probably you can tell us a little bit about your book, The Way Thai Lead. Why do you have particular interest on face or หน้าตา in Thai society?
Well, I was born in Thailand and raised in Thai society for much of my life, and so I knew about this as a child, sort of tacit knowledge of face. But as I got involved training Thai leaders, I noticed that it had something to do with the way they related to their luk nong, to the ones that they were training, and so. I wanted to discover what it had to do with either empowering younger leaders or disempowering younger leaders. And that's what led me. That was the initial thing that led me to do the research.
So
Yeah.
you talked to as many as 77 people.
That's right.
For the research, right?
Right.
And who were these people? You don't have to be specific,
Right.
But I'm sure that they must be surprised to know that you are doing a research on face.
Yes, yes.
Which I think, you must agree with me that most Thai take the issue of face for granted.
Yes.
They don't even try to understand or read the deeper meaning of what the word face means,
Yes.
right? So who are these people to talk to, and then
Right.
how was the reaction to your proposal to do research on this?
Well, I networked and I've got people all the way from the Tambon or the sub-district level leader, all the way up through university professors, police, border patrol police, some politicians, some former prime ministers, and then some religious, some clergy as well. So it was it was a purposeful sampling from society, and it was long interviews because it's tacit, right? The word is tacit. The Thais know it like fish in water, but they don't know it well enough to describe it, to dissect it, to analyze it. And so I had to take the approach of qualitative research, or asking questions and then listening.
Yeah.
But they knew that you were doing something about face. What was their reaction?
Maybe a little bit cautious at first.
Okay.
And what I knew not to ask any one person about their face, or to say, tell me about a time when you lost face.
Okay.
What you do is you say, do leaders ever lose face? And they say, oh yeah, all the time. But, okay, can you tell me about it? And that's how they talk. And I found them very forthright in giving information.
And how do you find face or หน้าตา very essential in Thai society, especially for leaders? What your analysis tell?
Yes, that all the research says it's extremely important for leaders in Thai society. In fact, you cannot really lead at any significant level and not have some form of face. But that's why I had to dig deeper. What do we mean when we say to have face? Because if you just say เรื่องหน้า in Thai, it doesn't do it. So I had to listen. What are the words they use to actually describe all the dimensions of face?
But face must be important in other society as well, because leader would like to maintain that status and how they handle the situation. But why do you think it's very particular for Thailand's context?
I think partially because hierarchy is still so strong in Thai society. I think that these leaders have had this example set for them for a long time. And so there's this concept that everybody has to kind of have their act completely together. You can never stumble. You can never show any weakness. Are other nations the same? Absolutely. And in fact, there are face scholars all over the world.
Okay.
I'm a face scholar, and they study face in other nations. But it's not talked about as face, like with the word, the human face. In the States, in the United States, you might have spin doctors, people that are tweaking images, PR teams, that kind of a theme. But here in Thailand, I think it's also very important because of the concept of human worth. And in order to get the acceptance of other people, you've got to project yourself as someone who has a special amount of human worth.
But you link face to other characteristic also, right? You mentioned about barami.
Yes.
I don't know what you translate in English, charisma or whatever it is.
Yes.
And reputation and image. So how does face fit in all these characteristics?
Right. Well, the way I found my the pathway on that is I asked, first of all, I asked the Thais, tell me about people who have a lot of face, mi na mi ta, okay? And so they would respond. And then I would hear these words. And the words I was hearing was nata for sure, which is face eyes, or I call it prestige.
Okay.
Okay, and then kiet, honor. Okay, chu sieng, which is public acclaim, I call it. And then barami, which is accumulated goodness, or sometimes moral strength. And then the last one was saksi. So I started asking about these terms, and I said, well, let's separate them. And their first response, everyone, they said, it's impossible. I don't know how to separate these words because they're all มันปนกัน is what the Thai say. แยกออกจากกันไม่ได้. And so I said, okay, well then if you have nata, you automatically have barami. Oh, no, Ajahn, no. So I said, well, they have to be different. And so that's how I pulled the meanings apart.
So which one is the most influential in Thai society?
Depends what circles you run in. The way that I would say it is that nata is the external sort of bling, the dazzle of Thai society. And you can fool people and you can also intimidate them with your money. And that's what happens on the nata level. On the kiet level, kiet is really, really good when it's based on true honor. Provided by society. The third one, chu sieng, to me, is it's important and very powerful, but it does not provide any kind of a moral basis for behavior. And I'm interested in virtue, and I'm interested in virtuous leadership, which led me to barami. Because barami, Thais should be so proud of this term, because it's something deep within Thais, and yet it's this idea that leaders can give a win-win situation. Leaders can lead and still respect other people. And so then saksi was the most abstract, the most complex. But the saksi is basically goodness within. It's basically how much worth do I award myself?
No, in your book you mentioned specifically an incident in which you became part of the attempts to give somebody some face, right?
Yes.
You talk about this meeting you had with local officials, a police officer, right?
Yes.
And you were the only Farang there. And they treat you with great honor because they believe that you would give that MP who was presiding over the meeting a very, very big face. So tell them more about that incident.
Okay, sure. I was with my friend who was the chief of police in a province, and he had said, come and I want you to interview my younger lieutenants and some of the lower ranking officers. We'll do a focus group. I thought, wonderful, great. I was thinking research. But when I got there, a government MP, Minister of Parliament came along, and it turned out that after our town meeting, which we had, he asked his friend if he could take me to another place where he was going, and I thought, well, what about my interviews? And he said, no, you go with him. So I found myself in his car, and we went to another sub-district, and it turned out this whole thing was a temple drum, up in the north, a temple drum competition. And I was just trying to follow all the cues, and then it came time for him to speak, and all the Nayampa and everybody, the district officer, everybody was standing up there, and then they called me up there, so I stood up there as well. I didn't know what I was doing until it was all over. And my police friend came to pick me up, and he said, you know why you went today? He said, because he got face out of that. In fact, all the villagers thought, wow, this is an international event. And because they thought you were speaking English with him, you know?
Yeah.
The presence of only one Farang there was enough to
Yes.
give him that kind of prestige.
Right.
And this is your book.
Yes, it is.
Very fortunately of me that I got the book. So what have you learned the most from writing, interviewing people in this book?
What have I learned the most? Wow. I would say what I've learned the most is that it's a very complex subject, and but my biggest takeaway is honestly the concept of barami. And that's why when I get toward the end of the book, I write many chapters about barami from what people taught me about it. Because again, I was looking for how do we look to the future without rejecting our past here in Thailand. And the way to do that is the pathway of barami, to walk that pathway, because what it involves is it's treating people with respect, but barami leaders tend to create meritocracies. And if you talk, I do a lot of coaching and consulting here in Thailand, and if you talk to particularly the younger ones, the young gens, they're interested more in a meritocracy. They're asking for it. And barami leaders are leaders who, from the first, they let virtue lead their decisions. They are fair in their decision making, and they're willing to correct people below them, but they do it with dignity and honor. And in the end, it turns into a meritocracy where the right leaders rise for the right reasons. And that's what we're all looking for, right, in a just society.
Now, in your research, did you try to focus on some certain individuals who might have both barami, face, and some other qualities, prestige, reputation, image, and to try to find out how they managed to accumulate all these qualities?
That was probably a little deeper than I went in my research, but they talked in so many examples of people who have barami that the picture became clear. In terms of research, they call it reaching saturation in your research. And you began to say, and if I would say, talk about a virtuous leader, they would describe this leader. If I were then to say, talk about a leader with barami, they would describe the same type of leader. So I began to see that the bedrock of Thai face is really actually saksi, which is honor within, and then it's the honor, and then the pinnacle of honor being barami.
And you have been in Thailand long enough to understand, to know, Thai people. Have you yourself in any situation that you have found yourself to sort of to try to save face and try to?
I probably need to be careful though. I mean, there's so much you learn growing up in the society, so you're able to hopefully read the situation and not cause others to lose face. Rule number one, right? Don't cause other people to lose face. And I try my best, but you can't always get it right. Always get it right. A specific incident doesn't come to mind.
All right.
And how do you, because you are, even though you were born in Thai, but you must quite closely associated with Western value, the way to treat people. And how do you draw parallel, sameness and differences between Western face and Thai face?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's probably similarities, but once you break into the languages, they talk about it differently. Okay, if you take the top leader of any country, does he want to lose face? Well, absolutely not. No matter who it is. But there is almost I'll tell you what. In Thai society, I think one thing that is different is that there's a sense that your own face is sacred. It's sacred, bin sing saksit, right? The Thai would say, and so. Because of that, you will defend it to your death. And you feel that you cannot, many leaders feel, that you cannot admit any wrong. You've always got to project this image of being perfect. I don't see that quite to the same extent in other societies, in Western societies, particularly U.S. society. I don't see it to the same extent. because there's a lot of ability to critique leaders in those societies, and people just don't buy it. They know that there's nobody perfect. They know there's no one that gets it right.
Do you mean there is no room for Thai leaders to apologize, to say sorry in the public? Will that mean he losing face automatically?
It's what I've often heard from other leaders when I ask them. Yeah, great question. Yeah, that's what I've heard, is that the very act of admitting, admission that you might be wrong, or saying you might have offended is loss of face in and of itself. Just that very act.
Yeah, I agree with you. I haven't really heard any Thai leading politicians say, I'm sorry for things that they might have done wrong.
Right.
So it's a matter of face, I believe. Yeah. No, but we would be very out of fashion if we don't talk about the so-called new normal, right?
Yes.
So in this new, so-called new world, the post-COVID-19 world, how do you think the manifestation of the face will be like? Do you think there will be changes?
I hope so, and I think this might accelerate some of those changes. I am a traditionalist in some ways. I'm a baby boomer, and so I know I don't look it. I know I look so young, but I'm a baby boomer, and therefore my values go way back in Thai society. But I really think I've thought of a few things here that I wanted to say that I think need to change in the new normal. For any leaders out there listening, the first thing I'd say is let go of the image. And like I just said, no one thinks you're perfect anyway. They don't think you're perfect, so let go of that image. The Thai phrase is สีตีนอย่างรู้พลาด นักปราชญ์อย่างรู้พลั้ง So if the นักปราชญ์อย่างรู้ so the sages, if even they can make mistakes, how is it that a leader magically never makes a mistake?
So it's better to just coming out and confess that you don't know something and apologize.
I think so, but you better know a lot, or people won't follow you in the first place.
But we have someone who has been saying, I don't know all along.
Yeah.
As far as politics is concerned.
That's true. Yes, we do. Another thing is the speed of change is so much faster, isn't it? Than 2 years ago, than 5 years ago, but it's changing in incredible way, exponentially. So that means no one is smart enough to have all the answers. And so I think that's what has to change in the new normal. And another thing I would say is to leaders, can we just stop only telling people what to do? Can we ask open-ended questions and then listen well? There's a novel idea. Let's listen well. And the last thing I would say, probably for the new normal, it takes us back to our more ancient roots, and that is choose the way of barami. And what I argue in my book is barami is a lot of things to a lot of people, but I argue it is a lifestyle. It is a way of living that you can choose. And over the course of time, if you do not pursue barami as a goal, as a trophy, what happens is you develop an inner goodness and an outward generosity. And those are the two things that come to my mind that leaders need for the new normal. This inner goodness and this outward generosity.
Since you mentioned barami, I believe that the person who is being talked most about today with having the most barami is none other than General Prayut Wongsuwan. As far as politics is concerned, how would he fit into this manifestation of face that we're talking about?
Do I have to answer that?
No, just for the kick of giving the face a face.
I must admit that there are many definitions of barami. Okay, and what I would say is this, and I say it in my book: anybody that goes after barami as a goal does not have barami. Anybody that has to build barami does not have barami. That person may think they have built barami, but true barami is not built that way. It is a byproduct of ผลพลอยได้ is a Thai phrase, right? And it's those leaders who do what I said, nurture that inner goodness and then that outward generosity on a consistent, fair basis, time after time. Those are the ones who set the gold standard, I think,
Okay.
for barami.
So you can't say I have barami. I cannot say that.
I just met you, sir, but you look like someone who has barami.
Okay, that's fine. All right.
So traditional barami by your meaning comes with money, rank, title, high status in society. But what you encourage new leader, new normal leader is to have compassion, understanding,
Yeah.
and concern for others. Do we get it right?
Yes, because the things you just cited actually, to me, are not barami. People think that's how they get barami, but it's not how you get barami. The first one, like you mentioned, money, but that's not that. People conflate it with the term barami, but that's not that. If you say my rank, my position, that's not barami.
Okay.
That is your position, and you're supposed to use it correctly according to the law to benefit other people, right? For the good of other people. So you can raise almost anything other than virtue, and I will argue that was not barami. You're conflating the terms. And that's the precise reason I did my research. Many people think I did this research. The Thais will say, may I,
Yeah, sure.
ให้ฝรั่งไปอ่าน the Thais will say, let the foreigner go read, go read this. And that's fine. A lot of foreigners are reading it, and I'm glad that it's helping. But really, I wrote this because I was born in Thailand, and I wanted to do it as a gift to the Thai people to understand something more deeply. And that is, when we have all these terms, not ta kia, chư siang, saksi, barami, all these terms are conflated together. What happens is we lose track of virtue.
All right. Besides barami, besides kiet, besides nata, are there any other outstanding characteristics of Thai leadership that you want to talk about?
Outstanding characteristics of Thai leadership.
Besides all these qualities we have been talking about, that are uniquely Thai.
Uniquely Thai. I think most of them, to me, are encapsulated in that. Certainly there are. The whole idea of ไว้หน้าคนอื่น, okay, which our politicians don't always do very well, that is the idea of deferring to the face of another, is, I like that. I like that. Now, we don't see enough of it sometimes among politicians, among people competing, in a zero-sum sort of situation for power. But I like the way that the Thai leaders can speak with respect and treat someone else's face with honor. There's sort of a give and a take there. In the horrible politicization in America, okay, the terrible polarization that's gone on, we've lost all track of that. It's like everything's out the window. Virtue's out the window. And you make angels of one group and you demonize the other group.
So that's President Trump, divider.
Don't get me going. Yes. So it's not just Trump, but it's the other side too. I mean, they love to demonize one another.
That's right. Yeah.
And I don't think it gets us anywhere. I mean, after all, this is what I view power as. I think power is a gift to be used virtuously for the benefit of the collective or for the benefit of others.
Yeah.
But does face have a place in American politics?
Does face have a place? Yeah, and it's just not talked about as face. It's their personal honor, or you insulted me, or it's the idea of wanting to have a comeback or an answer for everything, to cover your bases on everything so you don't look weak, don't admit any weakness. In that way, I think politicians around the world are pretty much the same. We fall in love with power instead of falling in love with goodness and virtue.
So does it mean new normal leaders should be female leaders, like Jacinda Ardern, Angela Merkel?
You make a great point, because what better could shake it up than more female leaders?
That's right.
All right? And not that the males have messed it up in every case, in every situation in the past, but I think it would introduce a whole new level of example, new ways of doing it in the new normal. Absolutely, I think we need to be opening the door to the female politicians and leaders and CEOs at every level.
What do you like to reckon for new generation who has to be working with older generation? Because we see how collaborative effort more needed in every organization.
Yes.
What do you reckon?
Yeah, my recommendation for that generation is, first of all, be patient. And that's a little tough because they sort of have a reputation for being impatient, right? A 2 years internship and they think they want to be the CEO of a company or something, and or that they can be, you know, and it's okay. That's a little naive. Okay, we accept that, but that can't possibly label them all. I think the thing I would say is that be a learner, be a learner, and absolutely speak up. Learn to speak up more, because there are leaders out there that want to listen, and so I think that's a key part is they need to speak up. It will be impossible to guide organizations in this day and age just by through maybe one person having all the answers. Nice. It's going to take a whole group of people, and it's going to take that synergy of creative thoughts. It's going to take holding our judgment in abeyance and listening to many diverse voices and putting it together as a whole afterwards. And that's what a collage is, right? Yeah. You put it together as a mural or a whole. And we need that. And we need those young voices. What happens oftentimes when you're in leadership a long time is you put a frame around everything. That's your box, your dekrop. Why? So, and those kind of voices asking fresh questions can help us as leaders think outside the box. Help us as organizations think outside the box. How do we become more agile? How do we do that? How do we become more innovative? What can we do? What are we missing? Challenge my assumptions as a leader, I would say, to a young leader.
Since we are talking about young people, I understand that among the 77 people you interviewed for the research were a number of young people as well.
There were.
But do they have a different concept about faith than the older groups of people?
They were in the minority of the group of people I interviewed. I found that they had some opinions, but it wasn't, the information wasn't as rich as when I talked to seasoned leaders. And so I sort of, I opted out of turning from the university, young university students, and I went to talk to leaders at every level. If I had the time and the funding or whatever else, I'm not asking for that here. I'm just saying, if I had that in a perfect world, I would do follow-up research with Gen Y and Gen Z. Asking very similar questions actually that I asked, because that is really legitimate to say how much are the values turning in this generation.
Wow.
So we can expect phase part 2.
Yes.
From you.
So you come back to join us soon.
I hope so. I would love to.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Larry Person, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Yes.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right.
So you get to know insight about Thai society through faith concept. That's research by Dr. Larry Person. If you are interested in the book to get to know about Thai society, so find it. Thank you very much again for joining Thai PBS World Tonight.
My privilege.
And that's all from Thai PBS World Tonight for tonight. But please stay tuned with us because we will come back again at 8 o'clock and you can listen to Dr. Larry or Dr. Likhit Person in Thai. So stay tuned with us at 8 p.m. For now, สวัสดีค่ะ
สวัสดีครับ Thank you.
สวัสดีครับ
When the world is in crisis
การแก้ไขปัญหาโควิดถือเป็นวาระแห่งชาติ
and people are looking for hope and answers, Thai PBS World is there with you with the best minds of the day. Join us on Thai PBS World Tonight, every weekdays at 7 p.m. Thai PBS World, we bring Thailand to the world.